Well, over the weekend, President Obama ordered some airstrikes in Libya to enforce a no-fly zone. Now, when you combine this latest military action, which could be temporary, could be a little bit more prolonged, when you combine it with both Afghanistan and Iraq, the expected pullout there notwithstanding, we may find ourselves as a country in a three-front war over in the Middle East. As he was retreating from defeat in Russia, Napoleon Bonaparte once observed, "Don't try to fight a two-front war." Well, now we may find ourselves here fighting a three-front war. But what I think has been the most interesting is watching the reaction to this at home. And I think it again demonstrates the need to govern yourself, ourselves as individuals, and then each other corporately as a country by an objective standard whenever possible. Case in point, now that the Democratic president is launching airstrikes and military action without any semblance of congressional approval, and if you've noted in the Constitution, if you've ever read it before, only the Congress is given the power to declare war. Well, now that the Democratic president is doing something that the previous Republican one did on a couple of major occasions, well, all of a sudden now the Republicans, Speaker John Boehner, well, what's the mission? We would like to get it defined. Well, we never really defined the mission in Iraq. The mission was, well, first it was to find WMDs, and then it was to, bring democracy and freedom to Iraq. Well, I mean, those are theoretical things. The second one is anyway. The first one never came to any semblance of fruition. So, at that time, the Democrats were like, well, what's the mission here? We don't have a really defined mission. Well, now it's the Republicans saying that. On the other hand, the Democrats, well, some of them, there's a few in the liberal wing that are a little upset by this action by President Obama, but others are willing to say, hey, this isn't an attempt to build a nation, which liberals used to be for. This is really a humanitarian airstrike, as each side attempts to find a way to both defend its own and or criticize the other for doing things they were criticizing the other or defending their own for doing in previous years. This is why it is so very important to have an objective standard. Our founders gave us a process by which we declare war in this country. Now, it's really not technically spelled out in the Constitution, so there's a lot of debate about what exactly does it mean for the Congress to be the only branch that can declare war. I mean, after all, in the Bush presidency, the Congress did indeed vote to fund his military incursion, so was that some semblance of a declaration of war? That's why it's important to go back and look at the context of our history. If you go back to the Constitutional Convention, only one delegate to the Constitutional Convention actually suggested the president ought to be able to launch unilateral military action without congressional approval. And one would be a lot less than a majority. But regardless of whatever the process looks like, I do think getting some kind of congressional approval for a president as commander-in-chief to commit the military forces into any theater is important for one huge reason. And that is because the Congress is the most immediate entity in the United States federal government for the will of the people. They are duly and immediately and directly elected by the people at large here in the United States. So for a president who also is duly and immediately and directly elected as well, but it also helps a president, I believe, to get more moral authority for what he thinks is right when he does so in accordance with his Congress and not unilaterally on his own. I believe that had we done this in Iraq and Afghanistan under the previous president, then a lot of what we saw here at home, dissension that set in after a few years of what seemed like an engagement that wasn't heading anywhere in some people's eyes, the home front, I think, would have been more inspired, would have been more mobilized. People would have felt as if there was more of an investment into this conflict than just another unilateral police action authorized by a president of the United States. There is just something to be said about a president who stands up and addresses the people's house before he commits the children of the people into harm's way. It gives that commander-in-chief a certain moral authority that otherwise he may not have. And I think given the condition of our country at this time, and given really the condition of the world at this time, President Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize when he had barely been in office long enough to change the types of drapes that were in the living quarters at the White House. And what's happened since he won that Peace Prize? We've lost Turkey, we've lost Egypt, we may lose, we never really had Libya, but there's more dissension there as well. The world doesn't seem to be at peace for having a Nobel Peace Prize winner in the White House. I think it would do him some good and the country some good if indeed he stood up as the commander-in-chief, laid out what is the objective here, what is the need for us to go in to Libya, which has been a despotic regime for decades. What is it about what's happening there now that calls for us to commit people into harm's way? Now, the argument could be made it's because these are pro-democratic demonstrations, and this is a real chance to advance democracy in Libya. Then if that's the case, then let's see some democracy here at home. Let's see the President of the United States stand up before both chambers of the United States Congress as the Commander-in-Chief, lay out the mission, and then ask for their approval for the funding and also the moral authority to obtain it and also to win it. I'm Steve Deace. Thanks for joining us here at stevedeace.com. You can email me, steve@stevedeace.com. Find me on Facebook, and don't forget we're on Twitter, Steve_Deace on Twitter. God bless.